Well, Anthony Glees is with us. He is a security and intelligence expert at the University of Buckingham, and also Duncan Gardham, who's a security analyst and international terrorism expert. This is about a story, front page of the Times today. The MI5 chief, Ken McCallum, has said that he has only finite resources but is facing grander and more sophisticated attacks. He's been forced to pare back MI5's focus on counter-terrorism to deal with the growing threat posed by Russia and other hostile states. Duncan, maybe I can start with you. How have things changed in recent years? Because it used to be, even in my lifetime, it used to be this kind of idea of asymmetric warfare. Now it's states. How is the security establishment reacting to that, and what have we learned from what Ken McCallum is saying, Duncan?
Well, look, MI5 have got years and years of experience in dealing with countering state threats. Of course, if we go back to the Cold War, that was really their main function, was to deal with that threat from our Cold War adversaries, and that was mainly the USSR in those days. And so really their counter-terrorism role has been a more recent one that slightly predates 9/11, but has been, you know, a really significant part of what they've been doing over the last 20 years. They've also, of course, had a role in Northern Ireland, and we shouldn't forget about how crucial that has been over the years.
It's still about a fifth of what they do now is still dealing with dissident Republican terrorism in Northern Ireland, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. So roughly the proportions these days, about 60% is spent on countering international terrorism, around 20% on countering state threats, and then the rest on Northern Ireland. So it's a significant proportion of their resources. But what Ken McCallum has been talking about recently is a rebalancing of that. And we've certainly seen between the counterterrorism threat, the international threat, as they call it, and the state threat. And we have seen a growth in those kind of actual physical attacks, and also attempts to spy on us and use Britain as a base to spy or indeed to launch, kidnap and assassination plots across Europe. So there's a lot of activity in the UK, and that is what Ken is saying. I'm just being distracted by the back of my head in the VT you're running, but
right, there's the back of you're looking at yourself. Maybe you're going, maybe you're examining, I don't know, hair growth or something. Let's talk to Anthony Glees. Professor Glees is security and intelligence expert at the University of Buckingham. We'll go back to Duncan in a second, but Anthony, I wonder what your thoughts were. We weren't really supposed to hear this. It's not that secret, but it's a little bit secret. It's meant to be an internal. Civil service thing. But Ken McCallum, the head of MI5, has said, we now face much more aggression from nation states. In effect, we have the 20 to 30 year holiday from that kind of big player. Sophisticated states in serious conflict with each other. It's back, I'm afraid. What do you make of that, Anthony?
Well, I think you're right to imply that Ken McCallum's going to be a bit embarrassed by this leak. We didn't intend it to go out. Because basically what he's saying is he doesn't have enough resources, and the country's got to choose between an MI5 that keeps its eye on terrorists, IRA terrorists, but Islamist terrorists too, and they're likely to increase given what's going on in Syria at the moment. That threat is there. But then there's what Ken McCallum implies is a new threat from Russia, Iran, China, and North Korea, for all I know. And that puts, a very unfortunate gloss on how we, the ordinary public, see MI5 and what it should be doing. We don't think they ought to choose between the evil of terrorism and the evil of nation-state subversion of the United Kingdom. We think that they ought to do both things. Yeah. So if Ken McCallum is saying, please can we have more money, I think the people of this country would say, certainly, yes, you definitely should. If, on the other hand, he's kind of telling us that only now has MI5 woken up to the threat of evil actors like Russia, like Iran, interfering in our national life in this country, and now resorting to sabotage, for goodness sake, in this country, I think people will say, yeah, well, we do need to do more about this, but is MI5 getting it right? And I think that's why this is embarrassing for him.
Duncan, what do you make of the fact that 1 in 8 of those being monitored by MI5 is under the age of 18? That's a statistic that leapt off the page for me, Duncan Gardham.
Yeah, so this is a huge problem, and I think what Anthony is saying is that kind of balance of resources is a massive challenge for MI5. And just to give you a few examples of kind of cases that they've had to deal with, is anything from a Hamas-inspired attack that happened in Hartlepool towards the end of last year, and then a right-wing attack that has happened at a hotel in Worcester earlier this year. Both of these using knives, easily available weapons, but there's also this young cohort that Ken McCallum has been talking about. A lot of these are very difficult for MI5 to identify whether these individuals are just talking a kind of fantasy talk or whether they're actually moving into action, and that is a really difficult task for them, because a lot of these people are living, young people are living in an online fantasy world, essentially, in which they can talk all sorts of things, and then that difficulty in saying, well, if you're saying that and then you're moving to action to purchase weapons, say, then we've got to take action as well.
Right. It's interesting, actually, just what Ken McCallum said on that. He said it won't always be the right approach to go for the criminal justice outcome, prosecution in all of those cases. Sometimes that's unavoidable if the risk is very intense and very immediate. But in other cases, you may have a deeply misguided person who's consumed too much of the wrong things on the internet. And some other form of intervention, typically at local level, not coming from MI5, but coming from someone closer, is probably a better long-term piece of risk management for the nation. Do you agree with that approach, Anthony? Do you think that's the best way to deal with young people?
No, I don't. I mean, I frankly, it is the job of GCHQ primarily to keep an eye on what people are doing on the internet and the World Wide Web. It's not really MI5's patch, nor should it be. Yes, they might have to intervene if there's a danger of terrorism, I accept that. But really, MI5 has got to focus on what it's been asked to do under the 1989 Security Service Act, which is to protect this country from threat from terrorism and state actors. And if, as I repeat myself, if Ken is saying, they need more money, well, that's fine, I understand that. They should have more money. The real problem for us in our liberal democracy, of which we're all rightly proud, is that we don't want to have a secret police in this country. We don't want to have an MI5 that is too proactive. But on the other hand, we don't want to have an MI5 that's driving through the rear-view mirror. And to some of us wonks who observe what's been going on, we do have the feeling in recent years that MI5 has been driving through the rear-view mirror. The past is not a guide to where we'll be in the future. Yeah, these kids can be a threat. We've seen that. There's lots of trouble out there. There's lots of anger. But it doesn't make sense for our various security agencies and intelligence agencies to do the same work as each other. Each of them needs to focus on what they're best place to do. And I don't think MI5 should get into the kind of the internet world, the pimply teenager in their room. Only if there is a serious threat from these people, yeah, then you wheel them in. But monitoring that kind of traffic, that's not their job. They shouldn't be doing it.
Let's just hear a little bit of what Ken McCallum has said, just before I get a final word from Duncan. This is Ken McCallum, the head of MI5.
We'll be looking at how much of our finite capacity can we spend on state activity from Russia or Iran or China, how much do we have to spend on various forms of terrorism, but also how much of our capacity can we spend on things that we think might be a threat tomorrow morning, and how much do we have to keep back to plan for how we are capable to do what the nation needs us to do in 5 years' time.
Duncan, how embarrassed do you think Ken McCallum will be this has come out? I mean, official sensitive, as we know in the government parlance, is not exactly top secret. It's a long way away from top secret, but it was not meant to be for public consumption. Do you think he'll care?
I don't think he'll be too bothered, if I'm honest, because I mean, as Anthony says, you know, the arguments over resources are never intended for public consumption. But what he's saying in terms of rebalancing, he has been saying over the last few months, up to a year really, in which he has been emphasising this increased threat from state actors, and we can see it really in kind of some of the executive action that they've been taken. We've been seeing Wagner, the unit that's sponsored by the Russian state, trying to recruit people to burn down warehouses in the UK, and also them using non-Russian actors to try and do kidnap and assassination plots around Europe. These are serious. And it's not just the Russians. We're also talking about the Chinese doing this sort of thing, and the Iranians. And so there is a real kind of thing that he has to be looking at, not just what's happening right now, but what might happen next. At the same time, what Anthony was saying, there's a real concern around the public about threats to life. And so terrorism is still the biggest threat to life, whether that is coming from a young individual who's bursting onto the street with a knife. And those are difficult people to track down, and they may just be in their bedroom, and they may be on internet chat rooms, Telegram and WhatsApp, and those require undercover online role-playing agents to engage with those people in order to work out what they're doing. This is complicated stuff, and the stuff that Ken has to deal with every day, deciding where he's going to put his resources. He'd always want more, but as Anthony said, we don't live in a security state, and we have to decide what is important in terms of spending resources and also technology. Looking forward, I think that's one of the things Ken mentioned, is where is the next threat coming from and how can we best use it and look at that sort of thing.